The howling wind cut through Kingman, Arizona like a blade of ice, swallowing Hannah Dawson's screams as she stumbled through knee-deep snow. Her fingers blue and her supplies long gone. The blizzard of 1887 had descended without mercy, transforming the rugged landscape into a white wasteland that threatened to become her frozen tomb. Hannah pulled her threadbare coat tighter around her slender frame, tears freezing on her cheeks as she fought against the relentless gale. 24 years old and entirely alone, she'd left behind a life in Philadelphia that had promised nothing but continued servitude to a wealthy family who treated her like property. The West had beckoned with promises of independence and opportunity, not this bitter cold death that now seemed inevitable. Just a little farther, she whispered to herself, though she had no destination in mind. Her stagecoach had been forced to stop miles back when a wheel broke, and the other passengers had chosen to wait with it. Hannah, determined to reach Kingman before nightfall, had ignored their warnings and set out alone. Now, as darkness gathered and the temperature plummeted further, that decision seemed to have sealed her fate. She stumbled, falling face first into the snow. The cold shocked her system, momentarily reviving her fading senses. Hannah pushed herself up, her arms trembling with exhaustion. In the distance, through the curtain of white, a faint orange glow flickered like a mirage. "Please," she whispered, not certain if she was praying or simply begging the universe for mercy. "Please be real." With renewed determination, Hannah trudged toward the light. As she drew closer, the vague outline of a small cabin materialized, smoke curling from its chimney. The promise of warmth pulled her forward until she collapsed against the rough-hewn door, her fist weakly pounding against the wood. The door swung open suddenly, causing her to fall forward into solid arms that caught her before she hit the floor. Hannah looked up through frost-crusted lashes into the most startlingly blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a weathered face framed by dark blonde hair. "Good Lord, woman. What in tarnation are you doing out in this storm?" The man's deep voice seemed to come from very far away as darkness crowded the edges of her vision. "Help," was all she managed before consciousness slipped away. Weston Archer had been alone for so long that the sound of another human voice, even one as weak and desperate as the woman's, felt foreign to his ears. He gathered her limp form into his arms, surprised at how little she weighed despite her layers of clothing. Kicking the door shut behind him, he carried her to his bed, the only proper place for rest in his modest cabin. "Miss, can you hear me?" He patted her pale cheek gently, alarmed by how cold her skin felt beneath his calloused fingers. When she didn't respond, Weston's training as an army medic during the war took over. He quickly removed her wet outer garments, wrapping her in thick woolen blankets before stoking the fire to a roaring blaze. The woman remained unconscious as he worked, her breathing shallow but steady. By lamplight, he could see she was young and would be pretty if not for the blue tinge to her lips and the frost clinging to her auburn hair. Weston set water to boil, preparing both coffee for himself and a broth he hoped would revive his unexpected guest when she awoke. As he worked, he glanced occasionally at the bed where she lay. It had been 3 years since he'd spoken to anyone besides shopkeepers in town and the occasional traveler passing through. After losing his wife and infant son to fever, Weston had retreated to this isolated cabin outside Kingman, working as a trapper and guide when necessary, but mostly keeping to himself. The woman on his bed stirred slightly, a small moan escaping her lips. Weston approached cautiously, sitting on the edge of the mattress with a cup of broth in hand. "Miss, can you drink something?" he asked, his voice roughened by disuse. Hannah's eyes fluttered open, confusion clouding them before panic set in. She tried to sit up, only to fall back weakly against the pillow. "Easy now," Weston said, raising his free hand in a placating gesture. "You're safe. I found you at my door, half frozen. This is my cabin about 5 miles outside Kingman." "Kingman," she repeated, her voice barely audible. "I was trying to reach Kingman." "Well, you almost died trying," he replied bluntly. "Here, drink this. It'll help warm you from the inside." With his assistance, Hannah managed to sit up enough to sip the hot broth. Each swallow sent warmth spreading through her chest, gradually restoring sensation to her limbs, a mixed blessing as pain accompanied the return of feeling. "Thank you," she said when the cup was empty. "I'm Hannah Dawson." "Weston Archer," he replied with a short nod. "Rest now, Miss Dawson. That storm's not letting up any time soon, and you need to recover your strength." "I can't impose," she began, but he cut her off with a shake of his head. "With all due respect, madam, you don't have much choice. Even if you were well enough to travel, which you ain't, nobody's going anywhere in this blizzard. The pass will be blocked for days, maybe weeks." The reality of her situation settled over Hannah like another layer of cold. Stranded in a stranger's cabin for the foreseeable future, completely at his mercy. Yet something in Weston Archer's direct blue gaze told her she had nothing to fear from him. "I'll pay you for your trouble once I reach town," she promised. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Let's worry about keeping you alive first. Payment can wait." As Weston returned to his chair by the fire, Hannah studied him through half-closed eyes. Tall and broad-shouldered, he moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to self-reliance. His clothes were simple but well-maintained, his beard neatly trimmed despite his evident isolation. Most striking were those eyes, clear blue as a summer sky, yet carrying shadows she recognized all too well. This was a man who knew loss intimately. "Are you a trapper, Mr. Archer?" she asked, fighting to stay awake despite her exhaustion. "Among other things," he answered, poking at the fire. "I guide expeditions sometimes, hunt, trap, whatever keeps food on the table. And you live here alone," something in his expression shuddered. "Yes, madam. Just me and these 4 walls for the past 3 years. Hannah wanted to ask more but couldn't fight the heaviness of her eyelids. As she drifted back to sleep, the last thing she saw was Weston Archer's silhouette against the firelight, solid and watchful as the storm raged outside. When Hannah awoke again, pale morning light filtered through frost-covered windows. The blizzard had stopped, though the snow outside looked dauntingly deep. She felt stronger, the deadly chill gone from her bones though her muscles ached fiercely. Weston was nowhere to be seen, but a cup of coffee and a plate with hardtack biscuits sat on the small table beside the bed. Hannah managed to sit up and reach for them, grateful for the simple fare. The cabin door swung open, bringing a blast of cold air, and Weston himself, arms loaded with firewood. He kicked the door shut behind him and deposited his burden beside the hearth before turning to her. "You're awake. Good." He removed his gloves and coat, hanging them on pegs near the door. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you," Hannah replied, suddenly conscious of her state of undress beneath the blankets. "My clothes hanging there." He nodded toward a line strung near the fire where her dress and petticoats hung. "They were soaked through. Should be dry by now." Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the cabin's warmth. "Could you? I'll step outside while you dress," he said quickly, grabbing his coat again. "Call when you're decent." Once alone, Hannah hurried to don her clothes, wincing at the soreness in her limbs. Her dress, though dry, was wrinkled and still bore stains from her journey. She smoothed it as best she could, then attempted to bring order to her tangled hair using her fingers as a makeshift comb. "Mr. Archer," she called when she was presentable. "You can come back in now." He returned, stamping snow from his boots before entering. His gaze assessed her critically. "You've got some color back. That's good." "Thanks to your kindness," Hannah said sincerely. "I don't know how to repay you." Weston shrugged uncomfortably. "Any decent man would have done the same." "Perhaps, but it was you who did," she insisted. "At least let me help around your cabin while I'm here. I'm a good cook and I can clean, been managing fine on my own," he interrupted, though not unkindly. He gestured to the hearth where a pot simmered. "Made stew. You should eat something substantial." Hannah approached the fire, warming her hands before it. "It smells wonderful." "Just rabbit and whatever vegetables I had stored," he said dismissively, but she noticed a pleased look cross his face at the compliment. They ate in companionable silence, seated on either side of the small table. The stew was indeed delicious, the meat tender and the broth rich with herbs Hannah couldn't identify. "Where were you headed?" Weston asked finally, breaking the silence. "Before the storm caught you, I mean." "Kingman," Hannah replied. "I answered an advertisement for a teaching position at the school there." Weston's eyebrows rose slightly. "You're a teacher." "I was a governess in Philadelphia," she explained. "I taught the children of a wealthy family for 5 years, but—" She hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much of her past to this stranger. It was time for a change. "Long way from Philadelphia to Kingman," he observed. Hannah smiled faintly. "Yes, well, I wanted a fresh start somewhere very different." "You certainly found that," Weston said dryly, gesturing to the snow-covered landscape outside the window. A sudden thought occurred to Hannah, causing her to set down her spoon. "The school, they're expecting me. They'll think I've abandoned the position if I don't arrive soon." "Nobody's expecting anyone in this weather," Weston reassured her. "Besides, the schoolhouse closed for winter break 2 weeks ago, won't reopen until after New Year's." "How do you know that?" she asked, surprised. A shadow crossed his face. "I keep track of things." Before Hannah could question him further, a sharp pain lanced through her foot, causing her to wince visibly. Weston noticed immediately. "What is it?" "Nothing," she tried to dismiss it. "Just a twinge." He fixed her with a skeptical look. "Let me see." Reluctantly, Hannah extended her leg, allowing him to examine her foot. His touch was gentle despite his calloused hands as he removed her boot and stocking. "Frostbite," he diagnosed, frowning at the discolored skin of her toes. "Not severe, but you'll need to be careful. Should have checked this last night, but you were in no condition." He retrieved a basin, filling it with lukewarm water from the kettle. "Soak in this. Too hot will damage the tissue further." Hannah obeyed, sighing as the water enveloped her aching foot. Weston knelt beside her, examining her other foot as well before seemingly satisfied that it wasn't similarly affected. "You're fortunate," he said, rising to his feet. "Another hour out there and you might have lost those toes or worse." Hannah shuddered at the thought. "I didn't realize how dangerous it was when I set out. The stagecoach broke down, and I was so determined to reach town." "Determination's admirable, but the elements don't care much for human will," Weston remarked. "Nature wins that battle every time." "Is that why you live out here?" Hannah asked boldly. "To test yourself against nature." Weston's expression hardened. "I live out here because it suits me." He turned away, effectively ending the conversation as he busied himself with chores around the cabin. Hannah watched him move about the space, noting how each item had its proper place. Despite his gruff demeanor, there was something reassuring about Weston Archer's methodical nature. As the day progressed, Hannah insisted on helping where she could, though Weston was reluctant to let her strain herself. They established an uneasy rhythm, working mostly in silence broken occasionally by necessary communication. By evening, the small cabin felt considerably less alien to Hannah. She'd learned where dishes belonged, how Weston preferred his coffee, and that the small shelf of books near his bed contained an eclectic mixture of practical guides and classic literature, all well thumbed. Night fell early, bringing with it a new dilemma that Hannah had been avoiding thinking about: sleeping arrangements. Weston solved it before she needed to broach the subject. "You'll take the bed again," he said firmly, unrolling a bedroll near the fire. "I'm used to rougher accommodations." "I've imposed enough," Hannah protested. "I can sleep there." "No." His tone brooked no argument. "You're still recovering." Hannah recognized the stubborn set of his jaw and relented. "Thank you, Mr. Archer." "Weston," he said after a moment's hesitation. "If we're going to be snowed in together, might as well use my given name." "Weston," she repeated, smiling slightly. "Then you must call me Hannah." He nodded once, then turned to bank the fire for the night. Hannah retreated to the bed, settling beneath the thick quilts that carried the scent of pine, and something indefinably masculine that she now associated with her rescuer. As darkness filled the cabin, broken only by the glow of embers in the hearth, Hannah found herself strangely comforted by the sound of Weston's steady breathing. Yesterday, she had been alone and certain of death. Tonight, despite being stranded with a virtual stranger, she felt safer than she had in years. "Weston," she whispered into the darkness. Came his drowsy response. "Thank you for saving my life." A long pause followed, so extended that Hannah thought he might have fallen asleep. Then his deep voice rumbled through the darkness. "Get some rest, Hannah. Tomorrow's another day." The next morning brought clear skies but no change to their snowbound situation. After a breakfast of cornmeal mush sweetened with molasses, Weston announced his intention to check his traps. "You'll be all right here alone for a few hours?" he asked, pulling on his heavy coat. Hannah nodded. "I'll be fine. Perhaps I can prepare something for dinner while you're gone." "Flour and such are in that barrel," he said, nodding toward the corner. "Help yourself to whatever you need." After Weston departed, Hannah set about exploring the cabin more thoroughly. It was small but solidly built, with careful attention to keeping drafts at bay. One corner held a workbench where various tools hung in precise order. Beneath the bed, she discovered a wooden box containing a woman's hairbrush and a small daguerreotype portrait of a pretty young woman holding an infant. Hannah quickly replaced the items, feeling like an intruder in someone else's grief. This explained much about Weston's solitude and the shadows in his eyes. Determined to repay his kindness in some small way, Hannah began cleaning the cabin. She swept the floor, organized his supplies more efficiently, and prepared a venison stew with dried vegetables that would simmer slowly until his return. She also discovered the makings for biscuits and set those aside to prepare later. By mid-afternoon, Hannah heard the sound of approaching footsteps crunching through snow. She opened the door to find Weston returning, 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder and a surprised expression on his face at the domestic transformation of his cabin. "You've been busy," he remarked, stepping inside and shaking off snow. "It was the least I could do," Hannah replied. "I hope you don't mind." Weston glanced around, taking in the swept floors and organized shelves. "No, it's nice." He hung the rabbits outside to clean later, then removed his outerwear. The cabin was warm from Hannah's attention to the fire, and the aroma of simmering stew filled the air. "Something smells good," he commented, approaching the hearth. "I found some herbs in your stores," Hannah explained. "I hope you don't mind my using them." "Not at all." Weston seemed almost bewildered by the home-like atmosphere that had developed in his absence. "Been a long while since anyone cooked for me." Hannah busied herself with preparing the biscuits, cutting lard into flour with practiced hands. "Your wife?" she asked softly, not looking up from her task. Weston's silence was so complete that Hannah feared she had overstepped. She glanced up to find him standing motionless, staring into the fire. "I found the photograph," she admitted. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Sarah," he said finally, the name barely audible, "and our son James. Fever took them both 3 summers ago." Hannah's hands stilled in their work. "I truly am sorry, Weston." He nodded once sharply, then moved to the door. "Need to clean those rabbits before dark." As he stepped outside, Hannah leaned against the table, heart aching for the man who had saved her life. His kindness seemed all the more remarkable knowing the burden of grief he carried. When Weston returned, they ate dinner in silence, though he complimented her cooking with genuine appreciation. Afterward, as Hannah washed the dishes, he pulled a worn deck of cards from a drawer. "Know how to play poker?" he asked, shuffling the cards with practiced ease. "I'm afraid not," Hannah replied, "but I'd be happy to learn." They sat at the table as Weston explained the basics of the game. Using dried beans as chips, they played several hands, Hannah gradually grasping the strategy involved. She won a hand through sheer luck, and the sight of Weston's surprised chuckle warmed her more than the fire. "Beginner's luck," he accused good-naturedly. "Perhaps," Hannah smiled, gathering the beans toward her. "Or perhaps I'm simply naturally talented." "We'll see about that," Weston challenged, dealing another hand. The evening passed pleasantly, the awkwardness of their earlier conversation fading as they focused on the game. Hannah found herself studying Weston's face when he was concentrating on his cards, the furrow between his brows, the way his eyes narrowed slightly when he had a good hand, the curl of his lip when he was bluffing. Despite his solitary existence, he was an expressive man if one knew where to look. When Hannah yawned for the 3rd time, Weston gathered the cards. "Time to turn in. Storm's done, but the snow's still deep. Might be another day or 2 before the path to town clears enough for travel." "I'm in no hurry," Hannah said truthfully. The prospect of reaching Kingman no longer held the same urgency it had before the blizzard. This cabin, despite its simplicity, had become a haven of sorts. That night, as she lay in Weston's bed listening to the occasional pop and crackle from the banked fire, Hannah found herself contemplating the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. Had the stagecoach not broken down, had she reached Kingman as planned, she would never have met this quiet, complex man who lived alone with his grief yet had opened his home to a stranger in need. The next day brought a similar routine, though Weston stayed closer to the cabin, chopping wood and making small repairs. Hannah continued to cook and clean, falling into a domestic partnership that felt surprisingly natural. "You mentioned you were a governess," Weston said as they shared lunch. "What made you decide to become a teacher out west?" Hannah considered her answer carefully. "The family I worked for in Philadelphia. The father became inappropriate in his attentions. When I refused his advances, his wife accused me of trying to seduce him." Weston's expression darkened. "Scoundrel." "Indeed," Hannah agreed. "I couldn't stay after that, but finding another position was difficult with no references. When I saw the advertisement for Kingman, it seemed like Providence, a place far away where no one knew me and I could start fresh." "Brave decision," Weston commented. "Coming all this way alone?" Hannah smiled ruefully. "Or foolish, considering how it almost ended." "Sometimes there's a fine line between bravery and foolishness," Weston observed. "I've crossed it myself more than once. During the war." Hannah asked, noticing how he instinctively straightened at the mention. Weston nodded. "Served as a medic with the Union Army. Saw things no man should have to see." "Is that where you learned to treat frostbite?" she inquired, glancing down at her foot, now almost fully healed. Among other injuries, he confirmed. After the war, I tried settling back east, but it never felt right. Too many people, too much noise. Sarah and I came west seeking peace. And did you find it? Hannah asked softly. A distant look entered Weston's eyes. For a while. The conversation lapsed into comfortable silence as they finished their meal. Afterward, Weston surprised Hannah by retrieving a worn fiddle from a trunk at the foot of his bed. "You play?" she asked, delighted. "Poorly," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "But it passes the time during long winter evenings." He tucked the instrument under his chin and drew the bow across the strings. The first notes were hesitant, but soon a recognizable melody emerged, Barbara Allen, a folk ballad Hannah remembered from her childhood. "My mother used to sing that," she said when he finished. "She had a beautiful voice." "Mine too," Weston replied, setting the fiddle aside, "though I didn't inherit her talent." "I thought it was lovely," Hannah insisted. "Would you play another?" Something in her eager expression seemed to please him, and Weston obliged with another song, then another. The afternoon passed swiftly, punctuated by music and conversation as they shared pieces of their pasts. Hannah learned that Weston had grown up in Ohio, the son of a blacksmith who had taught him the value of hard work and precision. He spoke of his time in the army with reluctance, but described his courtship of Sarah with fond remembrance. In return, Hannah told him about her childhood in a small Pennsylvania town, the daughter of a schoolteacher father and seamstress mother. Both had died of influenza when she was 16, leaving her to make her own way in the world. "We're both orphans of a sort," Weston observed. "Maybe that's why we've managed not to get on each other's nerves, cooped up in this small space." "Is that why?" Hannah asked, a teasing note in her voice. "I thought perhaps you simply enjoyed my cooking." Weston's lips quirked upward. "That too." As evening approached, Hannah stepped outside briefly to gather more snow to melt for water. The cold air was bracing after the warmth of the cabin, but the beauty of the snow-covered landscape took her breath away. The setting sun cast everything in golden pink light, transforming the ordinary into something magical. Weston joined her, standing silently at her side as they watched the sun sink below the distant mountains. "It's beautiful," Hannah murmured. "Yes," Weston agreed, though when Hannah glanced up, she found him looking not at the sunset but at her. Their eyes met briefly before he looked away, clearing his throat. "We should get inside. Temperature drops fast once the sun's gone." That night, a comfortable intimacy had developed between them, not physical, but the ease of two people who had shared meaningful conversation and found understanding in each other's company. As Hannah prepared for bed, Weston studied a calendar on the wall. "Tomorrow's Christmas Eve," he remarked, sounding surprised. "Nearly forgot." "Oh," Hannah had lost track of the days during her journey and subsequent rescue. "I didn't realize." Weston shrugged. "Doesn't mean much out here, just another day." But Hannah could see in his expression that it hadn't always been just another day for him. Before his loss, Christmas had likely been a time of joy and celebration. "Perhaps we could mark the occasion somehow," she suggested. "Not elaborately, of course, but—" "It seems a shame to let it pass unacknowledged." Weston considered this, then nodded slowly. "I suppose we could." As Hannah drifted to sleep that night, her mind filled with possibilities for making their unexpected Christmas together special. For the first time since learning of her parents' deaths, she found herself looking forward to the holiday. Christmas Eve dawned bright and clear. While Weston was outside tending to his morning chores, Hannah searched the cabin for anything that might serve as decoration. She found red yarn in his mending kit and fashioned simple bows to hang from the rafters. Pine branches brought in for kindling became festive arrangements on the table and windowsills. When Weston returned, his eyebrows rose at the transformation. "Been busy again, I see. Do you mind?" Hannah asked, suddenly uncertain. "I thought it might be nice to acknowledge the holiday, but if it brings painful memories, it's fine," he interrupted, though his voice was gentle. "It's nice." Throughout the day, they worked together on special preparations. Weston disappeared into the storage shed behind the cabin, returning with a dusty bottle of whiskey and a small package of dried apples he'd been saving. Hannah incorporated the fruit into a simple cake, using precious sugar from Weston's stores to sweeten it. As evening approached, Weston announced he needed to check something outside and disappeared for nearly an hour. When he returned, he carried a small, fragrant pine sapling. "Thought we might need this," he said gruffly, setting it in a bucket of sand in the corner. Not much of a Christmas tree, but Hannah didn't let him finish, impulsively wrapping her arms around him in a quick hug. "It's perfect." Weston stood frozen for a moment before awkwardly patting her back. When Hannah stepped away, her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment at her impulsive action. "Sorry," she murmured. "I got carried away." "No need to apologize," Weston replied, his own face noticeably reddened. "Been a long time since anyone was excited about Christmas in this cabin." Together, they decorated the little tree with strands of yarn and pine cones Hannah had collected. For a star, Weston fashioned a rough, five-pointed shape from a scrap of tin, polishing it until it gleamed in the firelight. Their Christmas Eve dinner was the most elaborate meal they'd shared: rabbit stew enriched with the last of Weston's preserved vegetables, biscuits with honey he'd traded for in town months earlier, and the dried apple cake for dessert. After they'd eaten, Weston poured small measures of whiskey into tin cups. "To unexpected companions," he toasted, raising his cup. "To kindness freely given," Hannah responded, touching her cup to his. The whiskey burned pleasantly as it went down, warming Hannah from within. They sat before the fire, the little tree twinkling with reflected firelight in the corner. "I have something for you," Weston said suddenly, rising to retrieve something from his trunk. He returned with a small package wrapped in brown paper. "It's not much, but—" Hannah accepted the package with surprise. "Weston, you shouldn't have. I have nothing to give you in return." "You've given plenty," he assured her. "The cabin hasn't been this clean or the food this good since, well, in a very long time." Hannah carefully unwrapped the package to find a beautifully carved wooden comb. The teeth were perfectly formed, the handle polished smooth and decorated with a simple floral pattern. "Did you make this?" she asked, running her fingers over the intricate carving. Weston nodded. "Whittling helps pass the time during long winter nights. I'd started it months ago with no particular purpose in mind." "It's beautiful," Hannah said sincerely, immediately using it to smooth her hair. "Thank you." "Suits you," Weston observed, his voice unexpectedly soft. The moment stretched between them, laden with unspoken feelings that had developed over their days together. Hannah looked away first, suddenly conscious of the impropriety of their situation alone together in this isolated cabin, growing closer by the day. "I should probably reach town soon," she said reluctantly. "The school will be wondering about their new teacher." Something in Weston's expression shuddered, but he nodded. "Snow's melting fast with this sunshine. Path should be clear enough day after tomorrow if the weather holds." A hollow feeling settled in Hannah's stomach at the thought of leaving the cabin, leaving Weston. In just a few days, this place had become more home-like than anywhere she'd lived since her parents died. "Yes, of course," she agreed, forcing brightness into her tone. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It hasn't been an imposition," Weston said quietly. "I've enjoyed the company. The admission, simple as it was, warmed Hannah more than the whiskey had, as have I. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned lower. Eventually, Hannah stifled a yawn and Weston insisted she take the bed as usual. As she settled beneath the quilts, she watched him arrange his bedroll near the hearth. "Merry Christmas, Weston," she called softly. He glanced over, the firelight casting his features in warm relief. "Merry Christmas, Hannah." Christmas Day brought with it a sense of both celebration and melancholy. They exchanged quiet Merry Christmas wishes over breakfast, both aware that their time together was drawing to a close. After the meal, Weston surprised Hannah by retrieving his fiddle again. "Thought I might play some Christmas tunes," he explained. "If you'd like." "I'd love that," Hannah replied, settling into the chair by the fire. Weston played traditional carols, his skill with the instrument more confident than he'd let on. Hannah sang along softly when she knew the words, her clear voice blending with the fiddle's warm tones. For a few precious hours, the cabin was filled with music and laughter as they shared holiday memories from happier times. As afternoon waned, Weston suggested they take a short walk outside. "Snow's firmed up enough to walk on without sinking too deep," he explained. "Might do us good to get some fresh air." Hannah bundled up in layers, including a thick woolen scarf Weston insisted she borrow. Outside, the world sparkled with blinding brilliance, the sun reflecting off snow so pristine it hurt the eyes to look directly at it. "It's magnificent," Hannah breathed, taking in the panorama of white-covered hills against the backdrop of distant mountains. "Different kind of beauty than you're used to in Philadelphia, I imagine," Weston remarked. "Very different," she agreed, "but perhaps more honest somehow." They walked in companionable silence along a path Weston had cleared, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Hannah found herself memorizing every detail, the particular blue of the sky, the feel of snow crunching beneath her boots, the solid presence of Weston beside her. When they reached a small rise overlooking the valley, Weston stopped. "Town's that way," he said, pointing southeast where Kingman lay hidden behind hills. "About 5 miles as the crow flies, though the trail winds more." Hannah nodded, the reality of her impending departure settling over her again. It seemed so close, yet it felt impossible to reach that night. "Nature has a way of reminding us how small we are," Weston observed. "One minute you think you're in control, the next you're at the mercy of a blizzard," Hannah finished, "or dependent on the kindness of a stranger." Weston turned to face her fully. "Not strangers anymore, though, are we?" The simple question carried weight beyond the words themselves. Hannah met his gaze, finding in it a warmth that had nothing to do with the winter sun. "No," she agreed softly, "not strangers at all." For a moment, Hannah thought Weston might reach for her hand or perhaps say something more. Instead, he cleared his throat and nodded back toward the cabin. "We should head back before the temperature drops." That evening, they shared the last of their Christmas feast, stretching the meal out as if to delay the inevitable conclusion of their time together. When the dishes were washed and put away, they sat before the fire, neither quite ready to end the day. "What will you do after I leave?" Hannah asked, breaking the contemplative silence. Weston stirred the embers with a poker. "Same as before, I suppose. Hunt, trap, trade in town when necessary." "Alone," Hannah said, the word carrying a question she couldn't quite articulate. Weston nodded slowly. "Been that way for 3 years." "Gotten used to it." "Have you?" Hannah challenged gently. "Really?" He looked up, surprise evident in his expression. "What do you mean, these past days?" Hannah began carefully. "It seemed to me that you've flourished with company, with conversation and shared meals and music." Weston's jaw tightened. "Temporary situation." "It doesn't have to be," Hannah said, the words escaping before she could consider their implications. A long silence followed, broken only by the crackling fire. When Weston finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "You have a position waiting in Kingman. A new life you've traveled thousands of miles to begin." "Yes," Hannah acknowledged, "but plans can change. Circumstances can illuminate new possibilities." Weston set the poker aside and leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "What exactly are you suggesting, Hannah?" Heart pounding, Hannah gathered her courage. "I'm suggesting that perhaps there's a reason I got caught in that blizzard, that perhaps finding your cabin wasn't just luck but providence." "Providence," Weston repeated, the word almost a whisper. "I know it sounds foolish," Hannah continued, her cheeks warming. "We've known each other such a short time, but I've never felt so at home with anyone, so understood." Weston stood abruptly, pacing to the window where darkness had long since fallen. "You're grateful for being rescued." Confusing gratitude with other feelings. "You really believe that?" Hannah challenged, rising to her feet. "Or is it easier than admitting you might feel something too?" He turned to face her, expression conflicted. "Hannah, I'm 10 years your senior, living in a cabin in the wilderness. What could I possibly offer someone like you?" "Kindness," she answered immediately. "Honesty, respect, all things I've found sadly lacking in men I've known before you." Weston shook his head, though whether in denial or disbelief at her words, Hannah couldn't tell. "You deserve better than this life." "Shouldn't that be my decision?" Hannah asked, taking a step toward him. "I've spent most of my life having choices made for me by others. For once, I'd like to choose for myself." The tension between them was palpable as they stood facing each other in the firelit cabin. Hannah had never been so bold, never laid her feelings bare so completely. The possibility of rejection loomed large, but something told her Weston Archer was worth the risk. "I lost everything once," Weston said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "My wife, my son, my purpose. I don't know if I have it in me to risk that kind of pain again." "Life is risk," Hannah replied gently. "Whether we acknowledge it or not, the blizzard taught me that." A ghost of a smile touched Weston's lips. "You're a stubborn woman, Hannah Dawson." "So I've been told," she admitted, though usually not as a compliment. "It was meant as one," Weston assured her, taking a tentative step closer. "Your determination is admirable." Hannah's heart thundered in her chest as Weston reached out slowly, giving her every opportunity to retreat. When she didn't, his calloused fingers gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I don't want you to leave," he admitted, the words seemingly wrenched from deep within. "The thought of this cabin without you in it, it's already unbearable." Hannah leaned slightly into his touch. "Then ask me to stay." Their eyes met, a thousand unspoken words passing between them in that look. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, Weston lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss so gentle it brought tears to Hannah's eyes. When they parted, Weston rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he whispered. "Not out of gratitude or obligation, but because you want to." "I want to," Hannah assured him, her hands finding his. "More than anything." That night, for the first time, they shared the bed, though only for sleep, both silently agreeing that some steps couldn't be rushed. Weston's arm around her waist felt right in a way Hannah couldn't articulate, as if a piece of herself she hadn't known was missing had finally slotted into place. The next morning brought practical considerations. Hannah still needed to go to Kingman to explain her situation to the school board, to retrieve her trunk from the stage office, to formally decline the teaching position. "I'll go with you," Weston decided over breakfast. "Been meaning to stock up on supplies anyway." They set out mid-morning, Weston's sturdy horse pulling a small sleigh through the snow-covered landscape. Hannah sat close beside him, bundled in every warm layer they could manage, including Sarah's old coat, which fit her reasonably well. The journey to town took most of the day, with Weston pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the area's history as they traveled. By the time they reached Kingman, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Kingman proved to be a bustling town, despite the recent blizzard. Mining operations and the railroad ensured a steady flow of people and goods, and the streets were alive with activity as they pulled up to the hotel. "I'll see about your trunk while you speak with the school board," Weston offered as he helped Hannah down from the sleigh. "Meet back here in 2 hours," Hannah nodded, straightening her wrinkled dress as best she could. "Do I look presentable enough to explain why I'm turning down the position I traveled all this way to accept?" Weston's gaze softened as he looked at her. "You look beautiful." A blush warmed Hannah's cheeks as she squeezed his hand briefly before they parted ways. The meeting with the school board went better than Hannah had anticipated. The chairman, a kindly older gentleman named Mr. Peterson, expressed relief at seeing her alive after the stage-coach driver had reported her setting out alone before the blizzard hit. "We feared the worst, Miss Dawson," he admitted. "Search parties were unable to venture far in that weather." Hannah explained her rescue and subsequent change of plans with as much propriety as possible, omitting the more personal aspects of her relationship with Weston. To her surprise, Mr. Peterson seemed understanding. "Love has a way of finding us when we least expect it," he remarked with a knowing smile. "And Weston Archer, for all his reclusiveness, is a good man. His service during the war and after as our town's only doctor for a time won him the respect of everyone in Kingman." "Doctor?" Hannah repeated, startled by this revelation. Mr. Peterson nodded. "Until the grief became too much after losing his family. He resigned his practice and retreated to that cabin. Town's been poorer for his absence, though he still helps in emergencies." This new information gave Hannah much to think about as she completed her business in town, formally declining the teaching position, but offering to help find a replacement from her connections back east. When she reunited with Weston at the hotel, her trunk secured and loaded on the sleigh, she found him in conversation with several townspeople, all of whom seemed genuinely pleased to see him. "Ready?" he asked when he spotted her approaching. "Yes," Hannah replied, studying his face with new understanding. "Though I think we have things to discuss on the journey home." The word home brought a smile to Weston's face that warmed her despite the chill air. "That we do." As they left Kingman behind, Hannah broached the subject that had been occupying her thoughts. "You didn't tell me you were a doctor." Weston's hands tightened on the reins, but his voice remained steady. "Haven't been one in years. But you could be again," Hannah pressed gently. "Maybe," he conceded after a long moment. "Town's grown since I left, probably needs more than one doctor now." "You miss it," Hannah observed. "I can hear it in your voice." Weston glanced at her, a rueful smile playing at his lips. "Not much gets past you, does it?" "I was a governess to 3 children under 10, Hannah reminded him. "I developed eyes in the back of my head and a sense for hidden truths." Weston chuckled, the sound rich and warm in the crisp air. "Fair enough. Yes, I miss it, being useful, helping people." "You could do both," Hannah suggested. "Keep the cabin but practice in town part-time. It's not so far with a good horse." Weston considered this, stroking his beard thoughtfully. "Could work, I suppose. Would give us income beyond trapping and guide work." The casual "us" sent a thrill through Hannah. They were planning a future together, however unconventional it might be. "I could still teach," she offered. "Private lessons perhaps, or help at the school when needed. Between the two of us, we could make a good life." Weston's free arm wrapped around her shoulders, pulling her close against his side as the horse continued its steady pace through the snow. "Already have a good life, far as I'm concerned. Anything else is just extra." They reached the cabin as evening fell, the journey back seeming faster than the outbound trip had been. Inside, Hannah was struck anew by how much the simple space already felt like home. Weston built up the fire while she unpacked essential items from her trunk, her few possessions integrating seamlessly into the cabin's sparse furnishings. That night, as they sat before the fire drinking coffee, Weston reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band. "This was my mother's," he explained, turning the ring in his fingers so it caught the firelight. "Sarah's was buried with her, but Ma left this to me when she passed." Hannah's breath caught as Weston slid from his chair to one knee before her. "I know this is fast," he said, voice rough with emotion. "And I know I'm not much of a catch, a widowed doctor turned trapper living in the wilderness. But if you'll have me, Hannah Dawson, I promise to cherish every day we're given together." Tears blurred Hannah's vision as she extended her trembling left hand. "Nothing would make me happier, Weston Archer." The ring slipped onto her finger as if made for her, and then Weston's arms were around her, lifting her from the chair into an embrace that promised a lifetime of protection and love. Their kiss was different this time, deeper, filled with promise and passion long denied. When they parted, both breathless, Weston rested his forehead against hers. "Been alone too long," he murmured. "Didn't realize how much until you stumbled into my life." "The winter was too cold to survive alone," Hannah replied softly. "For both of us, I think." Spring came early that year, melting snow revealing new growth beneath. Hannah and Weston were married in Kingman's small church, just as the first wildflowers began to bloom. The ceremony was simple but joyful, attended by townspeople who welcomed Hannah warmly and celebrated Weston's return to community life. True to their plan, Weston reopened a small medical practice in town 3 days a week, while Hannah offered tutoring services from their cabin for children who lived too far from the schoolhouse. The arrangement allowed them both to contribute to their community, while preserving the peaceful solitude they cherished. Their cabin expanded gradually, first a proper kitchen, then a small examination room where Weston could treat patients who couldn't make it to town. Finally, a nursery when Hannah discovered she was expecting their first child. Little Sarah was born the following winter, arriving during a gentle snowfall that bore no resemblance to the blizzard that had brought her parents together. As Hannah nursed their daughter by the fire, Weston sat beside them, his fiddle playing softly in celebration of the family they had created. "Happy?" he asked during a pause in the music, his eyes taking in the sight of his wife and daughter bathed in firelight. Hannah smiled, contentment radiating from her entire being. "More than I ever imagined possible." As years passed, their family grew. 2 sons joined their sister, filling the once solitary cabin with laughter and childish arguments, and the beautiful chaos of life being lived fully. Weston's medical practice flourished, and Hannah eventually took over teaching at the Kingman school when the previous teacher retired. 10 years after that fateful blizzard, Hannah stood in the doorway of their expanded home, watching Weston teach their eldest son to chop wood while their younger children played in the yard. Gray now threaded Weston's blonde hair, and lines of laughter framed his eyes, but he moved with the same strength and purpose that had first attracted her to him. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up, a smile spreading across his face, the open, unguarded smile that had once been so rare but now came easily and often. He said something to their son, then walked toward her, brushing wood chips from his shirt. "What are you thinking about, looking so thoughtful?" he asked, placing a kiss on her forehead. Hannah leaned into his embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of pine and leather that would always mean home to her. Just that sometimes the worst storms lead us exactly where we need to be. Weston's arms tightened around her. "Best blizzard of my life," he agreed, his voice warm with love and gratitude. "Though I'm glad we've had milder winters since." "The coldest winter brought the warmest love," Hannah murmured, tilting her face up for a proper kiss. And as their children called for them to come see some new discovery, Hannah and Weston walked hand in hand into the future they had built together, a future neither could have imagined on that desperate night when a woman, lost and freezing, had found shelter with a lonely man who had forgotten how to hope. Their love, kindled by shared fire and food in a desperate winter, had grown into a blaze that warmed not only them but everyone around them. And in Kingman, their story became something of a legend, how the worst blizzard in memory had brought together two souls who might never have met otherwise, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, love could take root and flourish against all odds.